Think we got it? Okay, everybody here. Well, thank you very much for coming. Again, my name is Neal Tapio. I'm running for the U.S. House. I'm from Watertown, an entrepreneur, small business person, and Christian conservative that's very concerned about the direction of our country. We have big challenges to face, and I've made it a part of my campaign for the last couple of years to try to face these big issues head on. It's one of the reasons I was the director of the state campaign for Donald Trump as well here in South Dakota as well as in northern Colorado, is because he himself takes big problems and he faces them head on. I've addressed several issues over the course of this campaign. One of them is the endless war on terror, and I've tried to identify the root cause of that terror, and I've identified it as Islamic terrorism, and those people that believe in the fundamental or literal interpretation of the holy books in Islam, which are the Quran and the Sunnah. And it's those books that are found, you'll find the literal interpretation is the root of laws of apostasy and laws of blasphemy, which believe that you should be punished or killed for leaving Islam. I've identified that, and that's a very challenging issue, but I'm willing to take that on. I also spoke with on several other issues. The second issue was I took on Medicaid expansion in the state. It was one of my platforms that I ran for the state senate. The governor, lieutenant governor, as well as a majority of the people, or almost a majority of the people in the state senate opposed, or were for. And so I addressed that issue, and because of my election, we turned the direction on that issue, and we had a majority of people in the Senate that were opposed to that, and so that was killed. The third issue that I sat on the Government Oversight and Accountability or Audit Committee, and that committee looked into Gear Up and EB-5. And because of that investigation into Gear Up, I came to the conclusion that there were some systemic problems in the Indian Reservation program, and that's really why I wanted to talk to you today. I put out a press release a couple of days ago that identified a problem in our state, that the reservation system should be ended. I put that out as a statement of a belief that I've come to over the last couple of years. But I believe in a complete understanding of this issue is that we need to renegotiate these treaties, because it's leaving behind a generation of people that are suffering from a lack of hope and a lack of purpose. We need major changes on the reservation system, not small changes. Small changes won't fix the problem. We have to have the courage to face these problems head on, and we have to understand the root cause of that problem. I have determined that the very reservation system takes away human dignity. Dependence of any kind steals a person's soul. While my inbox has been filled with positive comments, too many people have defended this system and called me a racist or a hater for even addressing this issue. I can't be involved in government and stand and watch as another generation of Indian children falls into a cyclical malaise of incest, molestation, drug use, depression, and suicide. I think it's racist to continue down this path. So therefore, I call for number one is renegotiating the Indian reservation system. I believe that the system in South Dakota, as I've seen it, is completely broken. Children are living lives without hope and purpose. I've asked this question to many Indian leaders over the last year. If you're in 5th grade and you're on the Rosebud or Pine Ridge reservations, what do you want to be when you're 25 years old? Answer after answer after answer, from state senators to former tribal leaders, is to be alive. That's not enough. That's not enough hope and purpose to keep people from doing drugs and alcohol and suicide. I have heard reports that incest and molestation is rampant on the reservations, and we don't do anything about it. That is a systemic problem that needs to be addressed. These childhood trauma events alter a person's life forever. And if we don't address that, we'll never have a system that functions properly. From incest and molestation, we have drug trafficking. We have Mexican cartels that are selling drugs and meth on the reservation. That's a systemic problem as well. We can put more money into law enforcement, but the very fundamental system of having two sovereign nations prevents our law enforcement from going on tribal lands. I've heard report after report that people are living scared on reservations, that they live in fear, that there are crimes that are never solved or never looked into, that people are ending up dead. If this is true, and it is, we shouldn't tolerate it as a people. We shouldn't tolerate it as a government. So, when I look into this even deeper, I look at dependence on government. That's what destroys the lives. You want to try to figure out what creates hope and purpose. Hope and purpose comes from a sense of accomplishment, some sort of a sense of being. In my family and many of my friends, hope and purpose comes from this belief in God. Belief in faith, family, freedom, and free enterprise. That's really what the heart and soul of what I was taught. I believed that when I was 25, I was going to be able to have a job. I was going to be married, have children. Some of those things don't always work out the way you plan on it. But you have a dream. And when you do have a job and you have a sense of accomplishment and you travel around the country or around the world with that job, you develop a sense of purpose. And combine that with this idea of faith. This idea that faith, hope, and charity. Faith in something bigger than ourselves. Faith in God. That faith teaches that God believes, that God is love. That He loves us no matter what. That we're special. That it matters if we're taking drugs or committing suicide. That we're here for a reason. It comes from this faith in God. Hope. Hope in something better than today's. Hope in tomorrow. From a faith perspective, you believe hope in eternity. It gives people hope and charity. Charity is love. Love in your neighbor. That's the Great Commission. It's the idea that you love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor is thyself. None of this is a part of government. As a matter of fact, government programs require you to leave this information out. And as a people become more and more dependent on government, and you have a breakdown of the family, and this type of moral instruction isn't a part of life, and there's a breakdown of a family that doesn't teach life skills, what do you have left? What you have left is what we have today, which is $1 trillion deficit. We have government program after government program that is pouring money from the top of this system that isn't helping the people at the bottom. This is where all the school shootings come from. There's no hope and no purpose. We have a society that is crushing under the weight of hopelessness. Now, if I were elected, I would work with other officials, government officials and tribal officials, and I would declare a state of emergency. And I'd say we're not going to go on until we address these problems and have a zero tolerance policy that we can agree on, that we can implement, that says that every life matters. I don't care if you're white or red or black. We're going to identify together hope and purpose so that when we talk to an 8-year-old, they know exactly what they want to be when they're 25. saying that you're alive is not enough. Our government is so broken. What we have to do is fundamentally change the idea of dependence. We have to get back to this idea of hard work, self-reliance, a belief in yourself. That's where the sense of accomplishment comes from. And we have to teach self-reliance. Without it, we're missing the boat. One of the things that I need to talk to you about is why I came to this issue. This isn't something I sat out and said, I'm going to start calling for the end of a reservation system. You develop it over time after talking to hundreds of people around the state that tell you the same story over and over and over again, and nobody dares address it. It came up from the Gear Up program. I sat on the Government Audit and Oversight Committee. They had a $65 million program from the federal government, and we brought in all this money. And the corruption of government and the crony collusion of government is that you take this money from the federal government and you set up a state agency. And when you have a state agency, well, we don't want to add government employees to it, so we set up one step outside of government. So in Gear Up process, we took that money and we put it into Mid-Central Education, which was a special education organization designed to help schools pool their money and resources to have special education. Okay? Once you had that set up, Secretary Rick Melmer, Secretary of Education Rick Melmer, set that organization up. He knows everything about it. Okay? He organizes a pot of money. He becomes a consultant on the outside, and he gets paid $185,000 a year to consult for this program. All right. Then they set up an additional 6 different organizations outside of the audit or review process of any government organization. Government Oversight and Audit Committee couldn't even look into that. All right, so you don't have accountability. Rick Melmer knew all of this stuff. He hired a person called Brenda Kuhn. She was the original grant writer. She was paid $1 million for this, to oversee this. After she got done writing the grant, she became the evaluator for the national or the federal Department of Education. It was her responsibility to make sure this was run properly. Okay? The shame of everything was there was a director of Indian education. Her name was Luann Wardall. In 2011, long before all the death and the embezzlement, she said there's something wrong with this program. She said there's no way to actually look and see where they're spending the money. That's number one. There was no way to oversee it. Number two is, she said also, all these people are related to each other. And it seems like nepotism. And this person oftentimes doesn't even live in the state of South Dakota. This is a way to get rich and to protect your pocketbook. That's really what's going on. Nobody dares ask these questions because it has something to do with Native Americans. You can't talk about this. So we keep silent. Meanwhile, Luann Wardall is fired. You know when she was fired? She was fired at the same time Dusty Johnson was hired. Mike Rounds, in the transition between the Rounds and Dugard administration, Dusty Johnson became the chief of staff. He was in a political deal. He resigned his Public Utilities Commission election position. He became the chief of staff. Luann Wardall didn't go out without a fight. When she was fired as a whistleblower, she emailed everybody in state government and said, this is what's wrong. She predicted embezzlement, crony capitalism, consultants, hiding, waste, fraud, and abuse. You hear about it all the time, waste, fraud, and abuse. But the key here is silence. Nobody inside government ever says anything. Why? You know why? Because you have a career path. And this is what career politicians do, is they create a career path. And the pathway is to not rock any boats. It's not, you don't want to offend the people that are giving money. So Lou Anwardall is fired. Roger Campbell comes in. He's another Native American. He sees the same thing. 6 months later, he's gone. Meanwhile, Rick Melmer and Brenda Kuhn and many other people that are working for the state government, still working as consultants to this day, are still overseeing this. And so when a murder-suicide happens and the Government Oversight Committee wants to investigate, we in the committee were told, no, there's nothing to see here. And we tried to get the person that knows everything, Rick Melmer, to come and testify, and he refused. Brenda Kuhn, who knows everything about this program, refused. People in government know, they just keep their mouth quiet. The same thing happened in EB-5. EB-5 is another scandal. The government has no business setting up businesses, but they started a private partnership, public partnership with a beef packing plant. The federal program was to sell $500,000 citizenships to people from China, Korea, and Saudi Arabia. And they're going to use that money to invest in a business. Number one is, if I'm a private business owner and I'm competing against a business that's set up by the government, that's not fair. It's not a level playing field. So that's number one, the whole program is corrupt. But secondly is, we create this program and they pay $50,000 for a middleman, okay, to find all these people overseas. In Canada, this same program was instituted. You know who those middlemen were? They were the Chinese mafia. It turns out that people really like to have American citizenships and passports. People involved in nefarious activities like to have those so they can travel around the world. When you have government programs instituted by state government, run by people that are not experienced at running businesses at this level, you're going to end up with corruption and greed, trying to line your pockets, but mostly you're going to end up with scandal, criminal investigation, and death. EB-5 ended up in all of that as well. The refugee resettlement program is the exact same thing. Former government officials, the Health and Human Services Secretary, Betty Oldenkamp, underneath Mike Rounds, goes to head up the refugee program here in the state. The Lutheran Social Services runs that. As an elected official, before I ran, I lived in downtown Minneapolis. I saw how 120,000 Somalis moving into a neighborhood changes the neighborhood. I saw in St. Cloud, as 65,000 people in a town, 20,000 Somalis moved in and it changed the town. The question is, how fast can you assimilate people coming into your town without increasing crime? We have crime right now in South Dakota. Sioux Falls is going up. It was up 80% in the last 3 years. Where do you think that comes from? It comes from out of control programs. We don't even dare ask. They shut you down. The vetting process. Last year, Betty Oldenkamp said the vetting process is safe. I said there's 50 Somalis from Minnesota that went to join ISIS. How can you say it's safe? It's not even refugees, it was children of refugees. She said it was safe. And I asked again, and she said, well, I've been told it's safe. I said, do you even know what it is? She didn't know. How can you say something is safe if you don't know what the program is? If you don't know the pathway to radicalization, how can you testify that it's safe? we've got to ask these very tough questions. And I do. That's why I'm running. I'm not running as a career politician. I don't want to be a politician. I'm a business owner. But we have major problems in our state that we have to address, and I'm willing to do it. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. I'm sure that some of you might. Yes, sir. Could you identify yourself?
Dan, Keller TV.
Yes, Dan.
So with regard to Indian reservations, would you want to renegotiate the system, end the system? Which one?
Yeah, well, it's very complex. What you need to do is you have to declare a state of emergency. That's the first thing, is to say that this system is failing, and you have to get everybody involved to say that this system, current system, is failing. If we can't agree on that, we can't go any further. But once we identify that the system is failing, then we have to understand how to create hope and purpose in people's lives, and that's where the renegotiation comes in. Right now, if you just give people free health care forever, if you give people free housing forever, you're not creating an incentive to become self-reliant. And that disincentive is destroying the hope and purpose. It's a part of the destruction. And so you have to have a renegotiation. You have to be willing to shut it all down, but you have to have a renegotiation. The second thing is that there was a court case. There's, I believe, a settlement that is, I believe, $1.3 to $1.6 billion in a trust fund. I think it's a shame that that money is sitting there without trying to help the catastrophic problem that we have right now. Does that answer your question, sir?
I think so. So you would push for declaring a state, if elected, you'd push for declaring a state of emergency on Indian reservations in South Dakota or nationally?
So specifically in South Dakota. And I believe that we should, specifically in South Dakota, I believe that we should have a pilot program that can, I should take this back. There are many reservations that don't realize that there are big problems facing their communities. Understanding how the reservation system works, how land ownership works, how investment into those communities work. For instance, right now, I was talking to a tribal leader about a month ago, and he was talking about the challenges of actually starting a business on the reservation. There's no ability to get long-term financing because there's no home ownership and there's no mortgages like you and I could take for granted. There's not a capital program where you can actually, as an individual, invest. That doesn't allow you to invest long-term. My family and my friends, I've started 4 businesses. My family have started businesses that are national and international in scope. It takes an incredible amount of energy and determination for a business to be successful. There are limitations, just like there's basis for corn to be shipped. There's a spot price in Chicago, and there's a basis or the cost of transportation storage to get that there. So corn could be selling for $3. It might be $2.70 trading here at a local market. The same thing happens on the reservation. When you're a long way from the marketplace, you're going to have a challenge getting a profitable business there. We have to understand how that works.
I wasn't precise enough with my question.
Okay.
Did tribal leaders you talked to support your idea?
Well, I believe there's a resistance in the leadership to do systemic change. And then your natural question would be why? Very similar to if you look at the Gear Up issue, Stacy Phelps set up 5 different businesses, and he had his ex-wife running one, his brother doing another one, his brother-in-law doing a third one. The leadership at the top has a pretty good system going. If you can get yourself between the people that need help and the government that has money, it seems to be a pretty profitable endeavor for many people within that tribal leadership.
The reservation system goes back to colonial before colonial days. That's the British way of how they negotiated with tribes. It's not an invention of tribal nations. It's an invention of the white folks that have since controlled the North American continent. Why would sounds like another white imposed process be any better than the one they have? Shouldn't Native American peoples have the self-determination to decide how they want to develop and make their lives and their people's lives better?
Yeah, so I actually, I like your question. As a part of that question is that we have to have a fundamental understanding of what the marketplace is. We live in the greatest country in the world. People dream, they die to get here. They come here because there's so much opportunity. What is the opportunity that people come for? It's for this idea that there's a marketplace, that I can rise as high as my merits will take me, okay? The job is to try to educate ourselves into a position of being able to take advantage of that marketplace, that we put something into that marketplace so that we can get something out of that marketplace. And the goal is to be able to make enough money to be able to live off of. That's what we were taught. It's what we were taught as children, is that you grow up and you become self-reliant, you get up and have a job and you go to work. Well, that is a system that is different than the Native Americans lived under 200, 300, 400 years ago, right? But our ancestry have built generation after generation after generation of this marketplace idea, this free market capitalism. So there's a rejection of free market capitalism in many different areas. You have a rejection of capitalism or free market capitalism in say, the south side of Chicago, the reservation system. But you look at the amazing things that the free market capitalism has brought. It brought electricity, temperature control, heating and air conditioning when it's 30 below zero. You have an amazing opportunity to live in inhospitable climates. That's what technology. We have to understand that there's a difference. I guess the fundamental difference between Republicans and Democrats is, or the liberal mindset is that progress comes. You hear progressive. Progress comes from helping one group by shifting the money from one group to another, and you help them. Conservatives believe that in progress as well. They just believe that progress comes from the expansion of the human mind, that the human mind can create and invent. And when you have a rule of law that protects your creation as property, you're able to make all humankind better. It's what Steve Jobs did with the telephone, or he expanded the horizons, the computer, the internal combustion engine, harnessing crude oil. This is what comes out of freedom and our free markets, is this idea to create and to invent so it helps all of humankind. We have to teach that to everyone, not just the reservation children, but our own children. Barack Obama comes to South Dakota, to my hometown of Watertown, and honors 5 people for all their sacrifice and how hard they had to work. And then he says, you know what's great? Is that we're going to reward that hard work, and we're going to give everybody free education. It doesn't work like that. When we give people stuff for free, it devalues that education. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What's the big message you got for us today?
The big message is that we have to declare a state of emergency. And we have to say that the reservation system is completely broken, and that we need to have a serious conversation that is hard and difficult, and I'm willing to lead that conversation.
State of emergency in only this state's reservations.
Today in this state, yep. All right. Anything else? All right. Thank you very much for your time. Did I answer your question?
More or less.
More or less. That's another difficult topic there.